When people talk about gun ownership, they usually talk about the hardware, but the most important component is almost never discussed: mindset. In this episode, I want to talk about what I believe to be the mindset of a healthy gun owner, what it looks like, and why it matters more than what you own or how much you own. From the first shot onward. Responsible gun ownership starts long before the first purchase or even handling of a gun. It starts with judgment and with emotional regulation and with restraint. Those qualities don't come from equipment. They come from mindset. Last year, Men's Health magazine published coverage of a survey that examined attitudes, behaviors, and reported experiences among male gun owners. What caught my attention wasn't the politics, although they did provide some data that sometimes was parsed out by political affiliation. What did catch my attention, and frankly surprised me a bit, was the behavioral patterns associated with the mindset. Keep in mind, I first read this article very early into my journey as a gun owner. A year later, it makes total sense to me, as the findings are in harmony with my personal experiences as well as my observations. For instance, men who owned only one gun reported roughly twice the rate of having fired a gun in anger, about 50% higher rates of firing a gun in fear, and higher rates of threatening or injuring someone with the gun than men who owned 4 or more firearms. Now, this doesn't mean that owning more guns makes someone safer, but it does challenge the assumption that a higher volume of gun ownership equals more volatility. One interpretation of this data, and this is important, is that people who own firearms may be more engaged with training and safety and skill development. Not obsessed, though my family may argue otherwise, and certainly not aggressive, but engaged. That type of engagement often brings greater familiarity and greater respect for consequences, and perhaps counterintuitively, more restraint. A quick story. Soon after I became a gun owner, I had a brief encounter with an individual who was upset that I made a turn into a grocery store exit that was a little bit in front of him. Now, as he passed me in the next lane, he kind of mean-mugged me a little bit and gave me the universal signal of his dissatisfaction. Now, I'm not necessarily inclined to escalate such encounters anyway, but I recall checking myself to ensure that I did not do so in that incident specifically because I had a firearm in my vehicle. Strangely enough, less than 2 hours later, I saw that same individual on a bus that I was taking to Allegiant Stadium to watch my Raiders play the Falcons. He was blissfully unaware that I was a guy from our earlier encounter. So that's always an admonishment to be careful about your surroundings. Now, most respondents to the survey either disagreed or felt neutral about the notion that owning a gun would make them feel more masculine. But a small group strongly agreed, and it was that group that reported dramatically higher rates of dangerous behavior, such as 13 times of a higher rate of firing a gun in anger, and 6 times higher rates of injuring someone with a gun, and 4 times higher rates of threatening someone with a gun. Of course, this is compared to the men that strongly disagreed with that notion. And that correlation is telling, especially given that there's nothing about gun ownership that should gravitate more towards men than women. Arguably, in my view, the opposite is true, given that physical disparities between the average sized man and woman would give rise to this notion that in a self-defense context, the gun can be a great equalizer. So what these results do not say is that gun ownership causes harm. But what I think it does suggest is that when firearms become tied to your identity or your ego or some sort of validation, then the risk factor increases. That's a mindset problem, not a hardware problem. Another interesting part of the survey often gets overlooked. Most respondents reported that their mental health either stayed the same or actually even improved after beginning to own firearms. Very few reported worsening mental health. That tells me something important. For many people, responsible gun ownership is not destabilizing. When approached thoughtfully, it can actually coexist or even reinforce a sense of control and well-being. And personally, I find training with a firearm a great form of relaxation. Now, I get it. It may be somewhat ironic that I find an activity that involves loud noises and violent recoils relaxing. But practicing gives me the rare opportunity to have laser focus on the single objective, getting as close to the bullseye as I can possibly get there. And when I do, I absolutely feel the rush. Probably the same type of rush that someone feels when sinking a three-pointer in basketball or playing a flawless song on the guitar, neither of which I can come close to doing in my lifetime. Let's examine for a moment what a healthy gun owner mindset looks like. I think it entails several different characteristics. First, emotional regulation, which is the ability to slow down under stress. Respect for consequences, understanding that even justified force is going to come with a lifelong weight. And humility, the recognition that the skill involved with shooting a firearm is perishable and that learning never ends. I think this mindset matters even more if you carry a firearm, because if a situation escalates, there's no guarantee that it'll stop before deadly force becomes necessary. And if your actions contributed to the escalation, any claim of self-defense may not survive legal scrutiny. Avoidance and de-escalation aren't just moral choices, they're practical ones and legal ones. In my mind, this mindset all ties back to when I first made the decision to become a gun owner. Remember, I didn't own a gun for most of my adult life. Not because I was afraid, but because I took the responsibility seriously. Now, when I finally decided to become a gun owner, I didn't feel any more aggressive. Actually, I just felt more deliberate. Responsible gun ownership didn't change who I was. It maybe clarified what I wanted to be as a gun owner. Well, as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What qualities do you believe define a responsible gun owner? What mindset do you think keep people safer and not just armed? Respectful, thoughtful reflections are always welcome here. A healthy gun owner is not defined by hypermasculinity. They're defined by restraint. Not by how quickly they can act, but by how often they choose not to. If we want healthier conversations about gun ownership and be advocates for gun ownership, then we need to talk more about the mindset as seriously as we talk about mechanics or the hardware itself. Because the most important safety feature has never been the firearm itself. It's the person holding it. Until next time, may God's love continue to completely cover you from the first shot onward.